What makes an army deadly? It's a simple question, but the answer, the answer is anything but. Is it just a question of numbers? A human wave crashing against a city wall until the defenders are simply exhausted, buried under the sheer weight of bodies? Or is it something more refined? Is it the brutal, almost inhuman tactics that make soldiers flinch and break? Is it the elite, lifelong training that turns a boy into a weapon, a cog in a perfect red-splattered machine? Or is it that one single individual at the top, that fearless leader, that Alexander, that Caesar, that Genghis Khan, whose very presence on the battlefield is worth 10,000 men? It's a question that gets to the very heart of organized violence, to the core of what makes one group of humans so terrifyingly effective at killing another. In this video, we're going to try to answer that question. We're going to peel back the layers of history, blow away the dust of centuries, and stare into the eyes of the top 10 deadliest armies of the ancient world. These aren't just soldiers, these are forces of nature. They were the human hurricanes that swept across continents, the earthquakes that shattered empires and toppled dynasties. They were the men who held the bloody quill that rewrote the maps of the world, whose names were whispered in fear in settlements thousands of miles away. They didn't just win battles. They defined entire epochs, leaving a legacy of conquest that we still grapple with today. So get ready, because we're about to journey back in time to an age of iron and will. We will march alongside the most disciplined legions the world has ever known and ride with the lightning-fast horse archers who seem to blot out the sun with their arrows. This isn't just a list, this is a deep dive into the mechanics of fear, the art of destruction, and the brutal realities of power in the ancient world. Prepare to meet the warriors who forged history, not with ink and parchment, but with blood and steel. Imagine a society where the state owns you from the moment you are born. Imagine a place where your only purpose, your only conceivable function is to be a warrior. This wasn't just a job description in ancient Sparta, it was a sacred calling, a total immersion from cradle to grave. At age 7, a boy was taken from his mother and plunged into the Agoge, a brutal, unforgiving training regimen that would systematically break him down and rebuild him into a hoplite. He was taught to endure pain, hunger, and cold. He was taught that mercy was weakness and surrender was the ultimate shame. This wasn't just military training, it was the forging of a human weapon designed for one thing and one thing only: to stand in the phalanx and not break. Their entire culture was a support system for this military machine. The women were raised to be mothers of warriors, famously telling their sons to come back with their shield or on it. This societal pressure created a warrior so disciplined, so utterly fearless, that the very idea of a Spartan army on the march was enough to make rival city-states tremble. We all know the story of Thermopylae, the 300 Spartans holding the pass against a Persian horde. And, while the numbers are mythologized, the core truth remains. A small force of Spartans was considered the equal of an army many times its size. They were deadly not because of their numbers, but because in a world of militias and part-time soldiers, the Spartans were the professionals. If the Spartans were a perfectly honed spear, the Roman legions were the entire military-industrial complex, perfected and put on the march. The deadliness of the Roman army wasn't just about the individual soldier, though he was a tough, disciplined professional in his own right. No, the true terror of Rome was its system. It was an army that thought like an engineer. When it arrived at a river, it built a bridge. When it halted for the night, it built a fortified camp, complete with ditches and walls. It could lay siege to a city with such methodical, inexorable patience that the outcome was often a foregone conclusion. The legion was a machine for conquering and, just as importantly, for holding territory. The organization was a marvel. The cohort system allowed for incredible flexibility on the battlefield, a stark contrast to the rigid, monolithic phalanxes it often faced. A Roman general could detach units, reinforce a weak point, or flank an enemy with a level of command and control that was simply unprecedented. Armed with the gladius for close-quarters butchery and the pilum designed to disable enemy shields, the legionary was a master of his deadly craft. For centuries, this army was the foundation upon which the entire Roman world was built and maintained. It was the guarantor of the Pax Romana, a peace kept, as it so often is, by the promise of overwhelming and systematic violence. For generations, the Greek world was dominated by the hoplite phalanx, a wall of shields and spears. It was effective, but it was also rigid, cumbersome. And then a king from the backwater of Macedon, Philip II, took that concept and supercharged it. He professionalized the army, drilled it relentlessly, but his masterstroke was the sarissa. This was a pike, an enormous spear, 18 feet long. It was so long that the pikes of the first 5 ranks of the phalanx projected beyond the front of the formation. What you were facing wasn't just a wall of shields, it was a tidal wave of sharpened iron points. It was an unstoppable, bristling hedgehog of death that no conventional force could charge head-on. And then Philip's son, Alexander, inherited this revolutionary weapon. But Alexander the Great added the final, crucial ingredient: genius and audacity. He used the phalanx as the anvil, a solid, unbreakable center to pin the enemy army in place, and then he would personally lead his elite companion cavalry, the hammer, on a decisive surgical strike against the enemy's flank or command. This combination of a seemingly invincible infantry formation and one of the finest heavy cavalry forces in history, all led by a man who never lost a battle, proved to be the key that unlocked the Persian Empire. In a little over a decade, this army marched from Greece to India, dismantling an empire that had lasted for centuries and reshaping the world in its wake. Some armies conquer you, they take your city, install a governor and collect taxes, but the Huns were different. The Huns unmade you. They were a force of pure entropy, a storm that swept out of the vast, mysterious steppes of Central Asia. Their deadliness was rooted in a lifestyle that was utterly alien and, honestly, terrifying to the settled peoples of Europe. They were born, lived and died in the saddle. Their mobility was their greatest weapon. A Hunnic army could appear on the horizon, raid and burn a settlement, and vanish before a conventional Roman or Gothic army could even be mustered to respond. They were, you could say, the original blitzkrieg, a whirlwind of destruction, and presiding over this storm was Attila. Under his leadership, the Huns became more than just raiders. They became an instrument of geopolitical terror. Attila understood the power of fear. Stories of their ferocity, their strange appearance, and their seemingly inhuman endurance preceded them. They were said to drink the blood of their enemies and practice ritual scarring to make themselves look more fearsome. This was psychological warfare at its most primal. They didn't need to defeat every army in the field. Their reputation did half the work for them. For the people of Europe in the 5th century, the Huns weren't just an enemy army, they were the wrath of God, the scourge of God, a cataclysm that threatened to extinguish the light of civilization itself. Imagine the mobility and archery of the Huns, but now add to it a level of discipline that would make a Roman centurion blush, a sophisticated command structure, and a strategic vision that spanned continents. That was the Mongol army. Under the unifying genius of Genghis Khan, the scattered nomadic tribes of Mongolia were forged into the single most efficient and deadly military machine the world had ever seen. Every man was a soldier, trained from childhood to ride and shoot with uncanny accuracy from the saddle of a galloping horse. Their composite bows could outrange almost any other weapon on the battlefield, allowing them to destroy their enemies from a distance. A death by 1,000 cuts, if you will, but it was their organization and tactics that elevated them to a legendary status. They used feigned retreats, flanking maneuvers, and a sophisticated system of messengers that allowed them to coordinate vast armies across huge distances, and they perfected the use of terror as a deliberate instrument of policy. If a city resisted, it was annihilated. Every man, woman, and child was put to the sword. The skulls of the dead were piled into pyramids as a warning to the next city in their path. This wasn't mindless brutality, it was cold, calculated, and horrifically effective. The message was simple: surrender and live, resist and be erased from existence. This army didn't just conquer empires, it depopulated entire regions, rewriting the demographic map of the world. In the heart of the sprawling Achaemenid Empire, an empire that was, for its time, the largest the world had ever known, there was an elite of the elite. They were the king's personal guard, an imperial shock force, and a potent symbol of the empire's power. They were known as the Immortals. The name itself is a piece of brilliant psychological branding. According to the historian Herodotus, they were a heavy infantry unit of exactly 10,000 men. The key to their name was that if any member was killed, wounded, or fell ill, he was immediately replaced. The unit was therefore always at full strength, never depleted. To an enemy, it must have seemed as if they were fighting an army that could not die. These were not conscripts. They were drawn from the noble Median, Persian, and Elamite peoples, and their training and equipment were the best the empire could provide. They were adorned in lavish, elaborate uniforms, often with gold and silver ornamentation, designed to awe and intimidate. While they fought as heavy infantry with spears, shields, and bows, their primary role was often to be the final, decisive blow in a battle, committed when the enemy was already wavering. Their true deadliness, however, was symbolic. They represented the inexhaustible, eternal power of the Persian king. To face the Immortals was to face the very heart of the empire, a force that, in theory, could never be broken. In the fractured, war-torn landscape of feudal Japan, a unique warrior class emerged. They were the samurai, the ones who served, but, they served with a sword. For centuries, they were the dominant force on the battlefield and the ruling class of the entire society. The deadliness of the samurai was a fusion of martial prowess and a deeply ingrained philosophical code, Bushido, the way of the warrior. This code stressed loyalty, courage, and honor above all else, even life itself. A samurai's entire existence was a preparation for a moment of perfect action in battle and a willingness to die rather than face dishonor. This mindset created a warrior of incredible focus and ferocity. Their training was all-encompassing, mastering the bow, the spear, and most famously the katana. The katana wasn't just a weapon, it was the soul of the samurai, a symbol of his status and honor, forged with legendary skill. In battle, a master swordsman was a terrifying whirlwind of precise, lethal strikes. But they were also skilled horsemen and archers, capable of adapting to different battlefield roles. Their iconic armor, designed to be both protective and terrifying, added to their fearsome presence. To fight a samurai was not just to fight a soldier, it was to confront a man who had already accepted his own death, and whose only remaining purpose was to take you with him. Long before the disciplined legions and the nomadic hordes, the defining instrument of power on the battlefields of ancient China was the chariot. And, well, no one wielded it with more devastating effect than the armies of the Zhou dynasty. This wasn't just a transport vehicle, it was, honestly, the ancient world's equivalent of a tank. A typical war chariot was a fast, two-wheeled platform crewed by 3 men, a driver, an archer, and a warrior armed with a dagger axe, a long polearm called a GE. This combination of speed, ranged attack, and close-quarters shot capability made them the masters of the open plains of the Yellow River Valley. An army of Zhou chariots charging across a field must have been a terrifying spectacle. The thunder of hooves, the rumble of wheels, the sky darkened by arrows. They were a weapon of the aristocracy, symbols of wealth and power, and their use required immense coordination and discipline. Entire battles were fought as massive, swirling engagements between hundreds, sometimes thousands, of these war machines. The Zhou dynasty's long reign was built upon this chariot supremacy, and their military philosophy, which emphasized coordination, communication, and the combined arms approach of the chariot crew, laid the groundwork for much of the military thinking, including Sun Tzu's The Art of War, that would follow for millennia in China. When we think of ancient Egypt, we often think of pyramids and pharaohs in golden masks. We don't always think of a world-class military power. But during the New Kingdom, after the Egyptians had been humiliated and occupied by the Hyksos invaders, they underwent a military revolution. They didn't just copy the weapons of their conquerors, they perfected them. The centerpiece of this new aggressive Egyptian army was the light two-man war chariot. It was faster and more maneuverable than its rivals, a perfect platform for the composite bow, which the Egyptians also mastered. They became the undisputed kings of mobile firepower. Under warrior pharaohs like Thutmose III and Ramesses II, this army became a tool of imperial expansion. Thutmose III, sometimes called the Napoleon of Egypt, led numerous campaigns, conducting brilliant sieges and winning decisive battles like Megiddo. The army was now a professional, standing force, with specialized units of infantry, archers, and the elite Chariot Corps. They developed sophisticated logistics to supply their armies on long campaigns into the Levant and Nubia. For several centuries, the Egyptian New Kingdom Army was arguably the most powerful and technologically advanced military force in the Near East, a deadly machine that secured a vast and wealthy empire. Yeah, what if an army didn't need to conquer you? What if it only needed to materialize from the sea, burn your town, take your wealth, and vanish before you could even mount a defense? This was the unique and terrifying deadliness of the Vikings. Their power didn't come from massive formations or complex logistics, it came from their ships. The Viking longship was a masterpiece of naval engineering. Fast, durable, and with a shallow draft that allowed it to sail up rivers deep into the heart of a continent. A monastery in Ireland, a town in France, a city in Russia, nowhere with a waterway was safe. This strategic reach was unprecedented and utterly terrifying. The Vikings themselves were ferocious warriors, fighting with a terrifying berserker-like fury. Armed with their iconic axes, spears and shields, they fought with a desperate courage born from a culture that prized glory in battle above all else. A Viking warrior's goal was to die fighting, to earn a place in Valhalla. This made them incredibly dangerous opponents in close-quarters combat. For nearly 3 centuries, these seafaring raiders were the terror of Europe. They sacked some of the richest cities in the world, destabilized kingdoms, and through their raids and settlements permanently altered the political and genetic map of Europe from England to Ukraine. Their deadliness was the deadliness of the perfect predator: speed, surprise, and shocking ferocity. So there you have it. From the unshakable discipline of the Spartan Phalanx to the terrifying lightning-fast raids of the Vikings, we've journeyed through an age defined by the clash of arms. Each of these armies was a product of its unique culture, geography and technology. The Romans with their engineering and organization, the Mongols with their unparalleled mobility and psychological warfare, the samurai with their fusion of martial skill and philosophical code. They weren't just collections of soldiers, they were complex systems designed for a single brutal purpose: to impose their will upon others through overwhelming force. They were the sharp end of the spear of their respective civilizations. Thinking about these armies raises a profound and perhaps uncomfortable question. How much has really changed? Our technology is vastly different, of course. A drone strike is a world away from a chariot charge. But the core principles, are they so different? The emphasis on discipline, training, mobility, psychological impact and decisive leadership, these are echoes we hear in every military academy in the world today. The human element, the mixture of fear and courage, the desire for security or for conquest, remains a constant thread running through the tapestry of history. The weapons change, but the nature of the warrior and the grim business of war seems to be a permanent part of the human story. The legacies of these ancient armies are all around us. They carved the borders of nations that still exist. They spread languages, religions, and technologies through conquest. They live on in our stories, our movies, and in the very foundations of modern military doctrine. They are a stark and powerful reminder that the world we inhabit today was not peacefully negotiated. It was forged in the crucible of conflict, shaped by the hands of the deadliest armies of the ancient world. Their ghosts still march through our history books, and their impact is still felt with every beat of the drum of war. Thank you for joining us on this journey.